Right, this is the last video on answering A-level history questions for AQA. We're going to have a look at the source questions, which are paper 2 only. Okay. Now the first thing we're going to do is go over the entire specification again. I did this at the start of every single video that in this little series, just so people have an idea of what they're going to be doing for the exams. So skip ahead if you have already seen this or watched my other 2 videos. So the assessment structure looks a little bit like this. The AQA history is split into 3 main sections. You have 2 exam papers and you'll have 1 piece of coursework. And like always, for the purposes of these videos, we're going to have a look at just the exam papers. So there are 2 exam papers you are required to sit. It is required that at least one of these focus on British history and the other on a different area of history. So you have to do at least 1 bit of British history, either paper 1 or paper 2. Okay, paper 1 is the breadth paper, looking at 100 years or more of history, and the paper 2 is a depth paper focusing on a smaller time frame. What is assessed in paper 1? Well, the specification says that it is the study of historical developments over a period of around 100 years and associated interpretations. Like I said, it's dealing with a breadth of history, a breadth of knowledge. And the exam is 2.5 hours, and you must answer 3 questions, one of them being a compulsory extract question. We've done how to deal with the extract questions in an earlier video, and we've also done about the essay questions from which you write 2. And this is worth 40% of your final A level. What is assessed in paper 2? Well, the study in depth of a period of major historical change or development and associated primary evidence. So the associated primary evidence is what's important for this video, because we're going to look at the source question, which is what we mean by associated primary evidence. It has the same structure as paper 1. The only difference is the compulsory extract question is now a compulsory source question. There's slight difference in the 2. So how do we answer primary source questions? So this is an example of a primary source question. So it's with reference to these sources and your understanding of historical context, assess the value of these 3 sources to a historian, a historian studying the extent of opposition to the Nazi regime in the years 1934 to 1937. This is an example of a primary source question. And the mark scheme says to achieve an A or an A star, you must show very good understanding of all 3 sources in relation to both content and provenance, particular balanced argument of their value for particular purpose given in the question, and demonstrate good understanding of context. Okay, so if we look here, the difference between the source question and the extract question from paper 1 is you're looking at the value of sources to a historian studying whatever it is that the historian will be studying. In this case, it's the Nazi regime between 34 and 37. In paper 1, it was how convincing are the 3 extracts, okay, with reference to whatever the specific area of history. Okay, so the question is slightly... This question is slightly to paper 1 extract question because you're evaluating, it's slightly different, because you're evaluating 3 primary sources. This means we need to look at more than just the content of the source itself. We need to have a look at who wrote the source, what kind of source it is, when it was written, what does it say, and then link all of this to your knowledge of historical context, okay? So this is an example of a source. A primary source is something that is written at or around the time of the events you're studying. So source A report from SOPAID, which is the Social Democratic Party in Exile, June 1934. SOPAID got its information from contacts who were working secretly in Germany. The Nazi regime still controls important instruments of power, the comprehensive propaganda apparatus of hundreds of thousands of supporters whose posts and prosperity depend on the constitution of the regime. At the top of the regime are men who have no scruples in the exercise of power and who, in the hour of danger, will not shrink from the greatest crimes. No system of rule collapses by itself. The weakness of opposition is the strength of the regime. Its opponents are ideologically and organisationally weak. They are ideologically weak because the great masses are only discontented. They are merely grumblers, whose discontent springs simply from economic motives. Fear of Bolshevism and the chaos which would follow Hitler's fall are still reasons why the regime is supported by the masses. The regime's opponents are organisationally weak because it is the essence of a fascist system that it does not allow its opponents to organise collectively. Okay, so I'd like to just, a little disclaimer for a start, is that I've just picked the Nazi Germany module for this A-level, for this example, because I'm aware that it's a relatively popular one. However, because I wasn't going to be able to make an entire video looking at how to answer a source question with reference to every single other period of history. If you want me to do videos on other areas of history within this sort of style, let me know. So step 1 is to read the source in its entirety and then highlight areas of note. Remember that you are looking for a number of things. You're looking for who wrote it, you're looking for what kind of source it is, when it was written, what are the arguments being presented, and the tone, and also anything that might be valuable or invaluable to a historian. Okay? So if we take this again, we can pick out a number of things about its provenance and its tone specifically. Let's not focus on what is being said in here. Let's just focus about this little bit at the top. So it's a report, okay, which suggests that only a few people would be privy to this information, and therefore it would be more truthful and honest. So if this was a speech, for example, to people to a party dinner or a load of party representatives, then maybe there would be a little bit of a flair for exaggeration and a flair for hyperbole to try and get people on side. But this is a factual report which does suggest that only a few people read it and therefore would be more accurate in its information. These are the kind of things that you've got to start to look for when you're looking at these source questions. It was also a report written by people who weren't in Germany at the time, so the Social Democratic Party in exile. Okay, so that's very important, and that shows that it might not be as valuable as other sources, since this is a primary source written thousands of miles away potentially. This was also written in June 1934, which is immediately following the Nazi establishment of the Nazi dictatorship. So they don't have any sort of hindsight for anything else. All they know is the events up to June 1934. And then finally, it got its information from contacts working secretly in Germany. So information is drawn from sources within Germany. That could show that it's more valuable in that people got their information from Germany, but then at the same time it could also show that it is less valuable, seen as it's a source which is a collection of other sources, and some of those might not be accurate. Okay, so how do we use this information? A report suggests that only a few people are privy. This suggests it would be valuable since its aim is to inform, not to persuade. Thus the information will be more accurate than hyperbolic. So the idea of it being a speech suggests that it would probably be trying to persuade people. However, it being a report, its just aim is to more inform people. Okay? The report was written by people who aren't living in Germany. This can be used to suggest it's less valuable to an historian since the information is being collected by people who aren't in the country of relevance. Again, so you can sort of argue either way for all of these points. Immediately following the Nazi dictatorship, well, this is valuable since it was written at the time of the Nazi dictatorship rather than immediately following, suggesting accuracy. It was collected from sources in Germany. Again, like I said earlier on, it could be taken a few ways. The information was drawn through a few sources, implies that any inherent bias can be removed because the report is collated using these different sources. So if you're if you're getting your information from one source, then there's room for it for inherent bias to exist. If you're getting your information from 4 sources and they're all independent and they're all saying the same thing, there is less room for it to be inaccurate. However, it can be said it's less valuable because multiple sources can give you multiple informations. Okay. Excuse me. So here's just a few examples of information you can retrieve from this primary source. Okay, so there are other parts of the source's provenance that we would analyse. For example, it may be valuable to diminish since it was written by the Social Democrats in exile, effectively an anti-Nazi group. So these people aren't almost sitting on the fence. They have a vested interest in the Nazi party falling and them coming back into power. So therefore, would they be a little bit more hostile towards the Nazis? So getting good at analysing the provenance of a source can only really be done with practice. So this is an insight, however, into like how you can like sort of have a look at different sources. But what about the source itself? Well, this is a lot more simple. You can apply your knowledge of historical context to various things said in the source. The overall aim is to answer the question, is the source valuable to an historian? Yeah, so is this source valuable to an historian? If you were a historian and you were reading this source, would you take value from it? It's essentially as simple as that. People seem to overcomplicate how to answer these questions. But what I've done here is taken the source and I've pulled out a number of different arguments made in the source that you can argue for and against using your knowledge of historical context. So a comprehensive propaganda apparatus and hundreds of thousands of supporters whose posts and prosperity depend on the continuation of the regime. Well, we can argue whether or not that's true or false because we know about the comprehensive propaganda apparatus that existed in Germany under Goebbels. Okay, the weakness of the opposition is the strength of the regime. Excuse me again. Well, was the opposition weak? You're also remembering that the question was asking about the extent of opposition between 34 and 37, okay? So it's saying that the opposition was weak and that this made the regime strong. So was the opposition weak? Talk about opposition to Germany in that time and argue whether or not it was weak or not. Its opponents are ideologically and organisationally weak. Again, this is making a claim about something that you can argue for or against in history using your historical knowledge. Were they ideologically weak? Were they organisationally weak? Or you can write that in your essay. A fear of Bolshevism, again, essence of the fascist system that it does not allow its opponents to organise collectively. So these are things that if you have enough historical context and historical knowledge, then you're going to do well at picking out these points and creating an argument from them. So I put here, so less valuable because this is valuable, because we talk about the Gestapo and the SS, again, the comprehensive propaganda. This is proven by the Wall Street crash. So springs from economic motives, so we can talk about that. So these are all the things that we can talk about. Okay, so the idea of linking sources together is actually a level 5 skill, and it's very important to be able to do that to get the higher grades. So, for example, explain why one source is better than another. This is just a little quote. Unlike source A, source B is written during the event. Thus, the information may be more accurate. Blah 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 blah. Whatever you want to say. It's a difficult skill to implement, but the best way to get better is to just simply practice. So putting this all together, you should aim to fully analyse each source and then come to some kind of conclusion as to which source is better. This conclusion should be literally like one line and just wrapping things up. So a bit like the extract question, it's asking which source is more valuable to an historian. Well, have a look at why source A is more valuable than source B. Yeah, okay. Source A says things that source B doesn't. Source A is less biased. Source A is written close to the time, or source A is written is a book rather than a speech, therefore would have less inherent bias. All these things. If you don't have time to write a conclusion, don't worry, you can still achieve high grades. The conclusion just helps clean the whole essay up. That's a very important point. You don't technically need a conclusion. All the level 5 sample answers do seem to have conclusions if you look at the sample answers on the AQA website. However, you'll also notice that they sort of make claims about which source is better throughout the essay. So writing a conclusion at the end just helps wrap the whole thing up. So finally, I'm going to look at my just top tips for how to deal with source questions. So again, read the source fully before you start. Read it twice if you have to. You will have time to read it twice. Okay. Highlight key points made. I remember this isn't a paper 1 extract question. The provenance and tone is important. And then finally, the most important tip, to get good at any of these questions, even the other two types of questions, you must just practice regularly. There's no other way to do it. If you practice regularly, you will get high grades on this source question. It's as simple as that. And that is really it for how to answer A-level history questions.